All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015, 6th edition. We are in the middle of Chapter 9, which is on how to work with master pages, and we're up to page 314 and 315, how to work with the client ID mode attribute. All right? So, it says Figure 9.3 shows two versions of the cart page after it has been updated to a master page. Because the part page uses Bootstrap classes for most of its formatting, the two versions are nearly identical. If you look closely, however, you'll see the height of the list box is different between the two versions. So this one here with a smaller list box, that one with a larger list box. In addition, the font color and weight of the label at the bottom of the page are different. Here and here. That's because the CSS rule that sets that specify the minimum height for the list box and the font for the label are being applied to the second version, but not to the first. All right? And they mention here, to see why this happens, you need to know how ASP.NET creates a client ID. Well, what's a client ID? A client ID is the value of the HTML ID attribute that is generated for a control. Again, it's the ID that ASP.NET assigns to an HTML element when it renders HTML in the browser. ASP.NET typically uses the ID attribute of a server control as the client ID. For example, if you've got a list box with the ID of LST_cart, it will be rendered as a select element with an ID of LST_cart. However, if a server control is placed inside of a parent control, such as a content placeholder control, then ASP.NET uses a combination of the parent control ID and the server control ID. So you might expect, in this case, the CSS would expect an ID of LST_cart, but ASP.NET generates an ID of main placeholder _ LST_cart. That's what's going on here. The good news on this is you can control how a client ID is created by using what's called the client ID mode attribute of a page or a control. The table that's shown here and also shown in the middle of page 315 shows the attribute values here. The first is predictable. With predictable, as it says, the client ID is the name of the parent container added to the name of the server control. This is the page's default value. Static means the client ID is the same as the server control ID. This can cause ID conflicts, such as there being several instances of the same user control on a page. There's auto ID, where the client ID is based on the conventions of ASP.NET versions prior to 4.0. And there's inherit, where the control inherits the parent's client ID mode. This is the default for a control. So the client ID mode attribute of a page or a control determines how the client IDs will be generated. This affects the ID selectors that you use both in CSS and in JavaScript. Now that was a little bit confusing. So the bottom line is, in one case, we ended up creating something that looked like this, and in the other case, it looked more like this or like this. Okay? So remember that the default Well, here is predictable. Maybe you could look at it as being among the worst. Then there's static, which can lead to conflicts. Then there's auto ID. All right. But I believe that when we come in and we do not put any code directly in those content providers, or those content areas, I think it'll do the inherit, which is what we'd want. We'll see as we go on. Again, I've got my book here, but I'm doing a lot of this, for lack of better words, almost off the top of my head. Maybe it shows. All right. How to create and develop content pages. I started showing you this just a minute ago. I right mouse clicked. So you could right mouse click on the master page as well and choose add content page. But I right mouse clicked on the project and selected add web form to the master page. Then I entered a name, and then I selected the master page dialog box. So you can do it either way. And sometimes when I explain that to people, they'll, well, which way would you recommend, Jeff? No, again, when you're told you can do something in two ways, you try both ways and you see which one makes more sense to you, and that's really the one that you should use. Now, ideally, what I just said made sense. Now, this next section talks about how to convert a regular ASP.NET page to a content page. What they're saying here is, in an ideal world, all right, now I am a 60-year-old, balding, overweight man. So in an ideal world, I'd be 25 again, I'd have all my hair, and I wouldn't have the pauncher on my gut. So what I'm saying is we don't live in an ideal world. But in an ideal world, when you create a new ASP.NET web application, as we have been doing, every single time you create a new application, what you should do is create a master file, even if there's little to nothing in it, and then create a master page, and then create content pages based off of that master page. Otherwise, you've got to do this. And I don't want to read this to you, but bottom line is what they're saying is you can manually convert a regular ASP page to a content page. I will tell you that although you can do this, I would recommend not even doing it. I'd recommend just starting over and recreate, create your master page and then create your content page, even if it means a lot of retyping. I would do it like that anyway. The ASP.NET, the ASPX file for the content page contains a page directive and one or more content controls. What does that mean? Again, let's go back as we just did, and let's go back one more time and look at our example page. All right. We manually went in and added these lines of code here. We added those. Okay? But all that we had previously to this was our page with our title on it, and I put the title in there because it was blank to begin with, our language, but now our master page file, so our link to the master page, which we didn't have in previous chapters. Our saying we want to automatically wire it up, our code file, and our inherits. Okay? And then, so we added this, and we added this. So that page directive specified the name of the master page and the title, but we had to fill in the title. The content control, okay, so this content placeholder that corresponds, the content controls correspond to the placeholders on the master page. So how do you add content to a page? I guess that's the next slide, I believe. So this is what you start with. You start with whatever was in the master page. And then you come in there and add whatever it is you want or need to add. I mean, bottom line, that's I can't say any more than that. Now, whoops, don't want to do that. Let's. Oh, I guess I didn't remove this one. I thought I did. Delete. Remove. There we go. So what we did in here, I showed it to you like this, but when we look at the design mode, okay, what we did was it came with this stuff, this white area that's up here. This was our content area. So that's what we added. And you see there's a dot there. Why is there a dot where when we run this, so if I right mouse click on this and say view in browser, it doesn't say got that dot there, it's got the word example. The dot that we see there is this dot right there. So the dot that you see right there, it got the word example because we put the title attribute up in our page directive. And then we added this ourselves. So I could come in here and type, just start, type in something else. This is an example of an additional paragraph that I added directly to my content page in design mode. Okay, so I put that in, I saved. Let's, again, we can go back and let's run. We really should be running the default page, so let's run that. And notice now when I click example, there's the paragraph that I just put in. So I can add either in source code mode or in design mode, but it's imperative that when I'm doing that stuff, that I add that information, and I add that information in, let me stop my run here. I add my information in my white area that's here. That's my content area. All right, so they mention in the chapter here, it says figure 9.5 starts to show you how to add that information. What you see on your screen in the slide here is the same figure that you see on page 319 in the book. So the master page elements are displayed along with the contents of the content controls. The display isn't formatted to the way it will look in the browser. So for that, you'll need to display the page in a browser to make sure it looks the way you want it to look. Note that if you're not using Bootstrap, Design View will give you a more accurate representation of the page, of what it'll look like in the actual master page content. If you work with a master page that has more than one content placeholder, well, you can have more, there will be a separate content control for each one of these placeholders. Now, I'm going to recommend you don't do that until you work with this for a while and understand what's going on. So, turning up to 320, on page 320 and 321, really on 321 in the figure that's there, on the figure that's there, that they show you, the figure on the top of page 321 is the same figure you see right here. So you've got your choice when you're doing this. As it says, if you want to set a default title, you can enter that directly. All right, if you want to override it in a content page, you do it like this. Remember, we just had title with a period. How to set default content is shown right here. So, I'm going to paraphrase and maybe even read directly some of the stuff on page 320 here. In many applications, you'll want a basic look and feel for the app as a whole, but you'll want to be able to customize individual pages or groups of pages. One way of doing that, if we want to, is to have nested master pages, which are master pages within master pages. The problem with nested master pages is they can quickly become confusing. I've said this before, and it sounds like bad humor on my part, but the system always knows whatever it is you want to do, even if you don't. In other words, it always follows the instructions you give it. You may have heard of the old computer expression, garbage in, garbage out, where if you input garbage into a computer application, by and large, the computer will usually attempt to process that garbage and output garbage. All right, we're saying the same thing here. Default content is a good way to handle scenarios where most of the pages of an app will be the same, but a few pages will need some changes to the master page content. For example, you may want to remove the navigation menu from the checkout pages, or you may want to put a login button in the header of some pages, but not of all. So this figure that you see or saw previously shows how to add two types of default content to a master page. First, if you add a title element to the head, that title will be displayed in the browser's title bar. Second, if you add content in a placeholder, that content will be displayed in all pages unless it's overridden. So they're talking about adding this stuff into a master page. This figure also shows how to display and override two types of default content on a master page. You can override the title by coding the title attribute of the title directive or of the page directive for a content page. If you don't override it, the value of the title element in the master page will be displayed. So in other words, if we come back here to our master page, site master, okay, and we've got, let's bring all this stuff down so we can see it. Notice what we don't have here. Oh, I'm sorry, we do have it here. Page title, my ASP.NET master page application. So in other words, if we don't override this by putting our own title, like we did here, if we don't do that, then our default title will be grabbed from here, and it'll look like that. That's typically not going to be what you want to have happen. You can display the default content in a placeholder by deleting the content control that's associated. So in other words, if in here I didn't want anything extra displayed, I could remove all this. You don't typically do that, but you can do it. All right? So many times people get hung up with, gee, should I do this? Should I do that? And sometimes it's not the fact that you should or should not do something. It's more the fact that you are able to do something if you indeed want to do so. All right. I'm going to stop right here because, again, I'm at 20 minutes. No, you know what? I'm going to do this, how to expose a public property. Because the rest of the chapter, I believe, is going to go through their example. Yes, it does. So let's finish this up, and then we'll finish up the chapter into part 3. So how to expose a public property. You can create public properties in a master page that expose elements of the master page to the content pages. A public property can have both get and set accessors if we want it to be read and write only, just a get accessor to make it read only, or just a set accessor to make it write-only. For instance, you can use a public property for an H1 tag that will be displayed at the top of each page. Then the content pages can override the value in this H1 element. This helps to ensure that you've got a common look and feel on the top of every page with that H1 heading, and this can help for SEO or search engine optimization. If you want to expose a public property, you can use the technique that's shown in this figure. First, what you'll notice is the attributes that we have here, those being type name and virtual path. Type name specifies the type name for the master page. For instance, for a master page named site.master, the type name is site. Virtual path specifies the path to the master page file that generates the type. When you use this attribute, IntelliSense can be used to help you pick up or pick the master page. So as far as the actual exposing of this is shown on the middle of page 323, this slide, and then the C# is shown. Again, I'm going to recommend that as we're learning this stuff, we try to keep it as simple as possible, and then start adding additional things to it as the need arises. So let's stop right here, and we're going to pick up in part 3, going over this order page example. That part 3 might be a very short lecture. I don't know yet.